Welcome. Today's going to be the first day in a continuing poem series where we look at a brief analysis and explanation of some poems in schools and some of my favorite poems. Our first poem is going to be the absolutely wonderful but often forgotten Sara Teasdale gem, There Will Come Soft Rains. There will come soft rains, and the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the pools singing at night, and wild plum trees in tremulous white. Robins will wear feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire. And not one will know of the war. Not one will care at last when it is done. Not one would mind neither bird nor tree if mankind perished utterly. And spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. Okay, it's kind of almost gives you the shivers, this poem, and it has a wonderful tension in it, and I hope to get into some of that detail. First off, I wanted to give you some historical context for the poem. The poem was written in 1918 and published in 1920, so as you could probably guess, it is a reaction to the Great War. The bloodiest war that humankind had ever seen, a war so gruesome that people called it the war to end all wars, a war that seemed to fully display humankind's brutality toward one another. And many people thought that war would never happen again. We had learned an incredible lesson from all the sacrifice. Clearly, the narrator in Teasdale's poem feels differently, though. Another thing that must have been on her mind at this time is the Spanish Influenza, which was an outbreak right at the tail end of World War I. It's one of the worst epidemics in human history. Killed more people than World War I and World War II combined. In fact, it infected about a third of the Earth's population. And in the United States, Teasdale is an American poet from St. Louis. According to the CDC, the life expectancy dropped by 12 full years, which is just incredible. So people must have thought they were being punished for the sins of the war, or that the world was coming to an end. The last thing I want to talk about is this French term that I'm not going to be the best at pronouncing. It's fin de siècle. It's I kind of mumbled the last word because I knew I wasn't going to get it. It's a term that means end of the century, particularly the end of the 1900s. And there was a lot of literature and art, such as The Scream, as you see on screen here, dealing with this. And as Oscar Wilde famously wrote, is she an optimist or a pessimist? Those seem to be the only two fashionable religions left to us nowadays. So my question I want to pose to you is, what religion does Teasdale's poem worship here? Is she being optimistic or pessimistic? And the more I think about it, the more I realize that both answers seem justifiable, that there's this beautiful tension, as I mentioned earlier in the poem. So let's look at the poem itself in detail now. I tried to take my annotations that I would do on paper and translate them to the computer screen. So I had 4 areas of focus for myself, and I want to go into each of them a little bit more. The first off is the couplets. I only highlighted the first 2, but you can see that ground, sound, night, white, fire, wire, one, done, etc. Sets up an AABB, rhyme scheme. That mixed with meter, which is pretty consistent. There will come soft rains, and the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, gives it this real sing-songy feel, almost like a nursery rhyme. I think this is picked up by the alliteration, swallows circling shimmering sound, or will wear feathery fire, whistling whims, low fence wire, and then that W alliteration continues throughout basically the rest of the poem, but I didn't want to flood the screen with that. So the sound of the poem, with the couplets and the meter and the alliteration, makes it feel almost nursery rhyme-esque. And when you look at the nature imagery in this poem, soft rains, shimmering sounds, frogs singing at night, wild plum trees, all of it seems to, the fact that spring is approaching, the season of life, all of it is very positive, very uplifting. But of course, it's not an uplifting poem. And there's a big focus on the future tense in this poem. There will come soft rains that nature or spring would scarcely know. Even the word tremulous, which has a sense of timidness or anxiety about the future, describes that something is going to happen. And if you look at the war imagery in the poem, which I didn't highlight but sticks out like a sore thumb, no one will know of the war. No one in nature will know of this war. Nature won't care when the war is done, or that it even happened, because nature will recover, but humanity won't. So it seems to say that, we talked about that pessimism versus optimism, that Teasdale is optimistic for the continuation of nature, but that continuation is not shared by humankind, that we will quite possibly destroy ourselves with this type of warfare. A lot of people, when they hear this poem, think of it more as a Cold War poem, as opposed to a World War I poem having to do with atomic and nuclear weaponry. And that makes sense when you think of what the poem has gone on to inspire, so I wanted to take a little look at its lasting influence. The most famous example would be Ray Bradbury's phenomenal short story, There Will Come Soft Rains, takes its title from it, which is part of the Martian Chronicles, which I highly recommend if you have not read it. It's this really creepy short story that plays into the themes that Teasdale's talking about. And of course, Bradbury is very much a Cold War era writer. And then the video game Fallout 3 also recites the entire poem and kind of has this fun combination of Bradbury's setting with Teasdale's emphasis on the poem, and brings it together. It's a wonderful use of the poem in that game. And again, we're talking about kind of a Cold War style game. The poem has also come up in movies. The Forest has a scene in it, but I didn't want to show that because I don't really dig that movie. There's a follow-up poem called Soft Rains Have Come, or There Have Come Soft Rains. So you can find that by searching it. I'll put a link in the description. It's a wonderful poem by Johnson. And that's all I have. So if you have any other poems you'd like me to look at in detail or any suggestions, let me know. And thanks for watching. Have a great day.